Okay, let's dive in. There was some pretty big news out of New Delhi just the other day, June 11th, 2025.
Right. Ashwani Lohani's appointment.
Exactly. He's the new director of the Prime Minister's Museum and Library. Now, that's at Teen Murti Pavan.
And, on the surface, it sounds like a standard administrative shift. Another appointment.
But it's really not, is it? When you start looking into Ashwani Lohani himself, the story gets, well, a lot more interesting.
It really does. He's not your typical bureaucrat, if there even is such a thing anymore. This guy has a track record of parachuting into some of India's most complex situations. Troubled institutions, even.
Yeah, he's built this reputation, hasn't he? Almost like the designated fixer, the person they call when things are, let's say, tricky.
That's a good way to put it. A fixer for really tough gigs.
So that's what we want to unpack today. His career is fascinating: railways, aviation, and now overseeing a politically sensitive historical museum. How does one person navigate all that?
And what skills make him the person for these kinds of jobs? We looked at quite a few sources to piece together this journey. Different perspectives, for sure.
Definitely. It gives us a window into how things actually get done or maybe don't get done within India's huge administrative system.
It's a unique lens on leadership in that specific context.
And honestly, his career has more twists than you might expect, especially when you find out about his passions.
Ah, yes. The steam engines, that's where it gets really interesting, doesn't it?
Steam engines. It's almost quaint, right? For someone who's dealt with, failing airlines and massive railway networks.
But it wasn't just a hobby collecting dust. He actually ran the National Rail Museum in New Delhi earlier in his career.
Right. And from what we gathered, he didn't just sort of keep the lights on. He brought a real flair to it.
He did. The accounts suggest he wanted it to be dynamic, not just a collection of old metal. He apparently had those old locomotives polished until they gleamed, like they were stars in a period drama, ready for their close-up.
I love that detail, making history feel alive, giving it some swagger, as one source put it.
Exactly. Shows an attention to detail, a sense of pride in presentation, even for something quite niche.
And it's that contrast, isn't it? This appreciation for the nostalgic past, side by side, with this proven ability to handle very modern, very complex problems.
Which leads us neatly into his time with the railways, a much, much bigger challenge.
Oh, absolutely. He became chairman of the Railway Board in 2017. Let's just pause on the scale here. Indian Railways.
Yeah.
It's like a nation unto itself.
It's often described as a 1.4 million employee orchestra. Think about managing that many people, that much infrastructure.
It's mind-boggling. And the challenges are just as immense. Constant budget pressures, legendary delays, safety concerns, tragic accidents. It's a relentless job.
Absolutely relentless. You're dealing with ancient tracks alongside demands for high-speed trains, plus the logistics, plus the workforce.
So how did he approach it? What was his style?
Well, the sources paint a picture of someone bringing a mix of, well, optimism, a belief that things could improve, combined with a healthy dose of jugaad.
Ah, jugaad. That Indian knack for making things work, finding clever solutions, often with limited resources. Improvisation, really.
Exactly. So practically, that meant pushing hard for safety upgrades, which were desperately needed, trying to streamline some incredibly complex operations.
And he was apparently quite good with the media, charming them, being accessible. That's not always easy in such a high-pressure role.
Right, which helps manage public perception, which is crucial for an organization like the railways. Now, was it a complete turnaround overnight? No.
Of course not. How could it be?
But the consensus seems to be he injected some positive momentum. He kept things moving forward, which in that system is sometimes a victory in itself. He kept the orchestra playing, maybe even slightly more in tune.
Okay, so from the world's biggest railway system, he then gets tapped for Air India. Another giant, but this one famously ailing.
And not just once. He had two separate stints as chairman and managing director. First in 2015, then again in 2019.
Air India. I mean, where do you even start? The airline was legendary for its problems.
Oh, absolutely. Bleeding money year after year, notorious for delays, flying planes that were often quite old, dealing with very powerful and often dramatic employee unions.
It sounds like an impossible job. One source compared it to piloting a plane with multiple engine failures while maybe the cabin crew is protesting.
That's a pretty vivid analogy.
Yeah.
And the balance sheet. Well, it was described as basically written in red ink. Deep, deep financial trouble.
So facing that chaos, operational, financial, human resources, what could he even do? You can't just magically fix billions in debt.
No, you can't. So his strategy, it seems, wasn't about some grand instant transformation. It was more grounded, focusing on things passengers and employees could actually see and feel.
Like what?
Better service, cleaner cabins, basic things, but important. Trying to instill some pride back into the workforce, who were, let's face it, working under a lot of negativity.
And he made some bold moves too, right? I read about him cutting back on those infamous perks, like free first-class tickets for VIPs and officials.
Yes, that sent a signal that maybe the old ways of entitlement were being challenged, that efficiency mattered. It probably didn't make him popular in some circles.
I can imagine. So, did he turn it into Singapore Airlines?
Huh, no. Nobody expected that, and the sources are clear that wasn't the outcome. But what he did manage to do, against the odds, was keep it flying. He stabilized things somewhat.
Just keeping it airborne was an achievement.
Given the state it was in, with tight budgets and suffocating bureaucracy, yes. By the time he left the second time in 2020, there was a sense that maybe, just maybe, it was slightly less chaotic, a bit more hopeful.
Which brings us right back to the present day. June 11th, 2025. He's appointed director of the Prime Minister's Museum and Library. Back in Delhi, but a very different kind of challenge.
Completely different. And the location itself, Team Murdi Pavan, is key here.
Because it was Nehru's residence, India's first prime minister.
Exactly. It's deeply intrinsically linked to Jawaharlal Nehru and his legacy. So the museum located there is inherently political. It just is.
And this revamped museum, since it opened in 2022, has already been controversial.
Hugely. You've got the argument that it dilutes Nehru's legacy, that it downplays his central role.
Versus the official aim, which is to showcase all of India's prime ministers, telling a broader story of the country's leadership.
It's been called a political tightrope walk from the very beginning.
So, Lohani's job now, it's not just about displaying artifacts or photos, it's about managing narratives, curating legacies.
Precisely. How do you present figures like Nehru, Indira Gandhi, Vajpayee, Manmohan Singh, Narendra Modi, all under one roof in a way that feels fair and balanced?
Without starting, as one source put it, a Twitter war or worse, a parliamentary shouting match.
Right. It's incredibly sensitive territory.
It's kind of ironic, isn't it? He spent years fixing things that move trains, planes, dealing with logistics and operations. Now he's managing history, which is static.
But the politics around that history are anything but static. They're constantly shifting, highly charged. He's moved from the mechanics of transport to the minefield of historical interpretation.
So let's step back. Why Ashwani Lohani? Why does he keep getting these incredibly difficult jobs? What's the pattern here?
Well, a few things seem clear from the sources. First, he's seen as someone who can navigate India's bureaucracy, that infamous labyrinth.
He knows how to cut through the red tape, perhaps? Or at least find a path?
Seems like it. He gets things done, or at least tries to, in systems where inertia is powerful. Then there's that blend we talked about, the steam engine enthusiast, who also understands modern budgets and management.
The nostalgia combined with practical 21st century know-how?
Right. It suggests someone grounded, but maybe with a touch of romanticism, or at least an appreciation for legacy.
And his reputation for fairness seems absolutely critical. The sources mention him earning respect from unions at Air India, engaging different groups at the railways.
That's key, especially for the museum role. He needs to be seen as impartial, not pushing a specific political agenda. He has to balance these towering figures, Nehru, Indira, Modi, fairly.
And he doesn't really have strong public ties to any one political party, does he? He's seen more as a professional manager.
That seems to be the perception, the guy you bring in to steady the ship, whatever ship it might be.
But the ship he's on now, the museum, the waters are definitely choppy, the challenges are immense.
Oh, for sure. He's walking into a political minefield. Every single decision will be scrutinized.
How do you tell the story of modern India through its leaders without upsetting vast swaths of the population, especially that central Nehru question?
Finding that balance, honoring Nehru's foundational role while giving appropriate space and context to all his successors, is perhaps the core challenge. He has to avoid the museum feeling like a mouthpiece for any single ideology.
And then there are the practicalities. Funding a major museum, keeping exhibits fresh, dealing with constant online criticism from, well, armchair historians and ex-trolls.
Yeah, that comes with the territory these days. It's a high-visibility, high-stakes role.
You know, looking at his whole career, it almost feels like a metaphor for India itself, this constant juggling of legacy and modernity, complexity and ambition, chaos, and somehow movement?
That's well put. And maybe his role now at the museum is to hold up a kind of mirror to that national journey, a very complex, contested reflection. His job is to hold it steady without it shattering.
It really is quite the trajectory. From polishing steam engines to keeping planes flying against all odds, and now curating the narrative of prime ministers. He's the ultimate fixer, perhaps.
He embodies that need in complex systems for people who blend technical skill with, integrity and a real knack for managing the human political side of things.
So, as we wrap up, here's something to think about. What is the role of an institution like this Prime Minister's Museum in a democracy like India? So diverse, so politically vibrant, sometimes so divided.
Can a place like that truly create common ground, a
Yeah.
shared understanding of the past?
Or is it inevitably going to be a battleground, reflecting today's political fights onto yesterday's history? Think about what it takes to tell a national story that feels true somehow to everyone.
It's a huge question. Whether you're trying to make trains run on time or make history make sense.